everyone. We are so excited to see you this morning to talk about why quiet quitting is BS. To get started, I'm going to introduce myself and then pass it over the team. But my name is Keela Johnson, and I am a strategist at the Nova Collective. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am so excited to be here with y'all. And with that, I will pass it over to Tiffany.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany. Thank you, Keela. Very, very happy to be here and excited to get this conversation going. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a partner here at Nova and I oversee our accounts department. Bryn.
Thanks, Tiff. Good morning, friends. Happy Friday. My name is Bryn Hovde, she, her, hers. Also a partner here at Nova. I oversee operations. And we're super excited to be here. We also have Becca Glodowski lurking in the background as the Nova admin and transparent webinar moment. It was supposed to be our awesome marketing person, Lily Parks, and she has a sick kid at home. So Becca is jumping in with us. So thanks, Becca, for being here. You might hear her voice throughout, and that's who it is. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. Want to just, give you a high level overview of who we are. As most of you probably know, we are, Nova is a diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI consulting firm. We've been around for almost 6 years, and we are a certified minority business enterprise and certified women business enterprise, which these days seems to matter to a lot of people. So that's that I wanted to make sure you all knew that. We've got about 40 folks that work at Nova, and with half of them being full-time folks, and then the other half being facilitators and moderators. So those folks work with us typically as contractors. You'll see here our team, obviously, I guess not obviously, but we are a very diverse team here at Nova. And one thing that we focus on in doing our work is representation. So you'll see folks of all types of backgrounds, races, ethnicities, a number of identities represented throughout our Nova team. So what do we do? What do we do at Nova? We work in a number of ways here. You'll see there, and I won't read these word for word, but you'll see here that we kind of have 3 buckets of ways that we work here. Learning and development is one way. So with our learning and development work, it's everything from virtual instructor-led training that could be in person or virtual. We have one-on-one coaching that sits under that learning bucket. We have some digital options that sit under that learning bucket. So again, quite a few options when it comes to folks engaging with our learning option here at Nova. We also focus on research and data analysis at Nova. Our head of research, often says, if you can't measure it, you can't change it. So here at Nova, we are big on research and data. And again, you'll see in the description there, we use a pretty rigorous academic standards for conducting our research. So, and we obviously prioritize the protection of folks who are engaging in research here at Nova as well. And then strategy and consulting is the last bucket of options here that at Nova and in the way that we work. And it just really depends on what companies are looking for. We can pretty much do it all is what I say. So you all will see here, everything from roadmap and strategy to very specific things like comms planning or hiring. So that's a little bit about our offerings. One thing that I really wanted to touch on here as we, prior to us engaging in this conversation is talking really about who we are as a business, how we work, and how we think about DEI work. We refer to ourselves as truth tellers here at Nova. We believe that that's one of the best ways to create change in doing DEI work. And so, you may hear us talk about that a lot. We often say and tell folks we are not the company that says, everybody put your multicolored hands in a circle, kumbaya, everything is great, because truthfully, everything is not, and we've got a lot of work to do. And, we take that head on. But what we will do is put our hands together and make progress and change hearts and change minds and change behaviors, right? So again, us being truth tellers, we're just going to tell like it is, and so that's part of it. And then you'll see throughout this webinar that we're doing exactly that, right? We're telling the truth, we're speaking our truth, right? And we also will open the floor for other, people to speak their truth, right? This is not just all about what we think. And you'll see us collaborating on thoughts, and then hopefully dropping some gems here and there that you all can walk away with. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bryn.
Thanks, Tiff. And that's a perfect segue into some of this groundwork for the conversation we're about to have. Why are we doing this? This is actually Nova's inaugural webinar. And the reason we wanted to start doing these is because we have these kinds of conversations with our internal team literally daily, right? We're constantly talking amongst ourselves, unpacking things. Just yesterday, we were like, we need to talk about land acknowledgements. So like, we're always coming up with these topics that we want to unpack with each other. And we really want to get into the complexity of some of them. We know that none of these things are simple. And we wanted to invite other folks to be part of the conversation. That's basically it. We're having it with our core team, and we wanted to expand the dialogue, expand the conversation. So every month, we're going to be trying to dig into another topic similar to this with different folks from Nova and members of the collective sort of leading the charge and leading the dialogue. And so next month, we will be talking about how to build community at work. How do we get away from like the rote lunch and learns and the like toxic we're all a family culture and build true community within like work environments and workspaces? That's for next month. How can you participate in this conversation? So we're going to ask for some of your experiences and perspectives in the chat as we go. That'll really help kind of keep the conversation going. As Tiffany said, this is just sort of our perspective. So we definitely want to be hearing from other folks as well. And then there will be, and when you're typing in the chat, make sure that it is set to type to everyone so that everyone can see it. It doesn't just come to us. And then there is a Q&A function as well down at the bottom there. So towards the end, there will be more specific time for specific Q&A for us when we get to that. So again, we'll be sort of inviting you onto the chat. We hope the chat is a free-flowing dialogue. It's one of the silver linings of the pandemic is to be able to have this sort of, real-time thought process happening on the sidebar. So as we get started, what should you know going in? The next 60 to 80 minutes are going to be fairly free-flowing. They'll be partially structured. We have some slides up here. We'll probably stop sharing them at some point so that we can just see faces as we talk, and then we might bring them back up. So it's partially formal with an agenda, and then really sort of free-flowing. We really want to invite you into one of Nova's sort of staff meetings, which means it might get messy. We might use swear words. Personally, I can't promise that I won't. I'll try to keep it like late night cable and not HBO Max. We'll see what happens. And then, also just to acknowledge what Tiffany already said, the three of us do not hold every identity possible, right? So as we're in this conversation, we're having them from our own identities, from our experiences, both our own lived experiences, but also the patterns and things we've seen working with the hundreds of clients and partner organizations we've worked with. We try to name that throughout, right? We're trying to build complexity, not simplicity, when we're talking about any topic and explicitly when we're talking about quiet quitting. So hopefully you'll hear that from us a lot, where we're sort of naming how these things impact us or how we've seen them show up within our own identities. And so again, that's where you all come in, and we want to hear that from your perspective as too, because we don't hold all these identities. And so we haven't experienced all of the possible things. So with all of that context and caveat, let's dive in. Keela, what is quiet quitting?
Hey, so quiet quitting is a little vintage. It was first coined at the Economic Symposium in 2009 as remaining in the workplace position while not actively going above and beyond. So the concept is not particularly new. Something we joked about was that this concept is pretty popular, like in office space where the employee is just doing the bare minimum to get by. There's some other relevant terms that have popped up in the pandemic era that we wanted to share that often come up when talking about quiet quitting. The first one is work to rule, which is a job or an action in which employees do no more than the bare minimum of the rules required by their contract. It's important to name that this context doesn't always apply to blue collar workers, gig workers, frontline workers, employees of like restaurants, food and service industry. So there is kind of a class element that goes along with work to rule. And I would argue throughout this entire conversation. I'd also want to mention the Great Resignation, which became another trendy term toward the height of the pandemic, in which folks were leaving their positions en masse for a multitude of reasons. And then there are two final quiet terms that we want to drop. This is a very quiet year, I suppose. Quiet hiring, which means that an employee goes above and beyond, perhaps even taking in additional responsibilities to prove that they have what it takes to excel in a given role, which honestly feels not that quiet to me. And then quiet firing, which I feel many people have experienced, in which leadership or your manager is increasingly cold or treats you poorly until the point in which you decide to leave. With that, let's see what the internet has to say.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to get into this. Thank you, Keela, for defining the terms for us. And I'll kick us off here. So and these are some of the tweets. There's so many when you start to Google this phenomenon, and a lot of hot takes on it. But as I was starting to do research for this conversation, and just starting to look around for this topic, I could not find any hot take of anyone who actually thought this was like a real thing, like a thing to be concerned about, in as much as I'm a manager at XYZ organization and all of my employees are doing this, and I'm mad about it. So the whole concept of quiet quitting kind of feels like a little clickbaity to me, like something that sort of evolves from the Great Resignation, because we need these cute terms now to talk about like the real shift that's happening in the workplace. So that's sort of where I'm sitting with this. And I'm curious for both of you all, Tiffany and Keela, where did you first hear about quiet quitting, and what was your initial reaction to it? Tiff.
So I'm not gonna lie. I honestly heard about it first from you all. And maybe, I don't know, I'm not super tapped into social media. We were just saying how I feel like I'm getting old, but I heard about it from you all, and I wasn't. I was like trying to understand. Bryn, I remember we were in the office, and I was like, "Wait, is Bryn? What does she think about it?" I couldn't really tell. But I am fully tapped in now. I know where you stand, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. I'll keep them to a minimum though as we dive in. I 100% agree. I think it's very clickbaity. I don't think it's quitting. That is where I'm tied up at, and maybe just because I'm caught up in the words. I think it's just doing the job that you've agreed to do, which I think many people have been doing for years, and I think that that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing the job that you've been hired to do. I think if you want to go above and beyond, that's also fine, right? I think we should be able to do what we want to do. And I think one of the issues with all of this is if you come to a job and you do what you're hired to do, that should be okay, again. But at some level, you're punished for doing that. Or if you're not doing as much as someone else, you're not being rewarded, right? And that person that may be in the same position as you is doing more and being rewarded, and you're in some ways being punished. So in grade terms, like the norm, right, is a C. And in order to get an A, you have to do the most. And should it be like that? I think that's a question. I don't think so, but I think that, that's kind of where we're at. I think it's an organizational problem. I don't think it's a people problem. I don't think that it's an employee problem. I think it's, I think that society, workplace culture, the corporate norm, and practices from folks who often have dominant identities setting the norm, among other things. I think that's why we've landed here. And in a little bit, I'll get into like, some people have to go above and beyond simply because of their identities, right? And we can get into that conversation later. But so I think I have a lot of thoughts. I'm going to pass it to Keila so I don't go off on a tangent.
Tangent support here. So I love the internet, and I've been reading a lot of internet. Particularly, I remember around the time that the New York Times released an article called "The Age of Anti-Ambition," and it was a little after like peak pandemic moment, basically saying that nobody has ambition anymore. And I was really thinking to myself, like, do I still have ambition? I think, like, looking back on my career, I got through entry-level positions and degrees by sheer force of will. If I do the maximum amount, I will get the maximum return on my investment. And through the pandemic, and I would say even a couple years leading up to that, to the start of the pandemic, I just really was like, is this it? Like, is this how I want to be operating? And I think those years leading up to the pandemic and the start of the pandemic really had me think, like, I don't know. I think my personal and professional sense of value have really been fused together. Like, what if work is just work and I feel really passionately about other things and I do them, and I go to work and I do my job, and then I get to do everything else. And I think it's easier for me said than done. If you're a moon person, I have a lot of Virgo and Capricorn placements. And so I have an internal drive to do the most at any given point in time. And that's great. That's great for me. It gives me something to do. But also, it's okay to just do what you agreed to do and move on and have other passions. And so that's something I'm grappling with. I don't know if quiet quitting needs to be the drama that it's kind of like being placed into. I think it's getting too much hype for what it is.
And we are here to increase the hype. You're welcome, everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah. What call is coming from inside the house? I am going to stop sharing. So we're not just looking at tweets from blue check marked people that are not us. And I also can vouch for Keila. So I distinctly remember, like, in an initial interview with Keila when she was joining the Nova team, first of all, she does do the most. She has an internal drive to do the most. And I remember talking about Nova's culture and how, you know, a lot of us knew each other before. We met people through these different connections. And it was like I did not use the word family because that is a huge red flag. But Keila very quickly was like, I just want to come to work and do a good job and then like be done with work every day. She was like, hard boundary. Thank you so much. You're going to pay me
so much
to do a task. She was also like higher ed PTSD coming into Nova. So, but yeah, can confirm. Oh, also your sister is in the chat confirming.
I love my fans. Shout out to my fans.
Shout out to the internet fans. Okay. I'm going to open it up to some other things. So industries, I was thinking about, and Tiff, you said this idea of like not going above and beyond and how that might land differently in different industries and sectors, right? We just mentioned higher ed with Keila. And would love to hear from folks in the chat, Keela's sister included, about, you know, the different industries that you all are coming from or that you have experience with, because I do think this is different. It feels different, kind of based on what that expectation or that socialization is within a specific industry. For like example, I have always had this sense in my career up to this point has been in production and in like sort of creative fields, that like at agencies, like creative ad agencies and stuff, like it's a non-starter, right? It's all about the long hours. It's all about client meetings at bars, and like you have to do the most at all times and like burn yourself out. And then even where I used to work, there was always this like very thinly veiled and sometimes very explicit sort of understanding that like if you didn't do this above and beyond, if you weren't doing the most at all times, somebody else would be happy to do it. So if like there was no chance of kind of like doing what you were paid to do, because there's always 10 people waiting in line to take your job. So what about, I want to hear from you all, and certainly people in the chat as well. Do you think there's a difference in how this quiet quitting trend shows up based on the industry? Keila, I'm looking at you, bud.
I'm thinking about, I'll speak from experience and then what I'm seeing from clients of there was a lot of expectation. I'm going to name specifically when I worked in student facing roles to always be available, which was looking back, absolute chaos to have someone texting me at 10, 11, early in the morning hours, personal information, or just things that are beyond my scope of work. I also want to say that I feel as a millennial really impacted by this idea of you should love your job and be asking for seconds. And if you don't like it, we can find somebody else to do it for you who would be happy to. And so there's this fear of sure, I could do the bare minimum, but there are apparently other people who would just jump in and do this work pretty quickly. I'm going to pause and Tiff, come in with your thought.
Yeah, for me, it's really just like, if you want me to do above what is listed in my job description or what I've been asked to do, just say that. Like, let's just, just say that. So then we can all understand, like, because also my above and beyond may not be the same as the person next to me. So now I'm just not, it's perpetuating an issue, right? Like we're continuing, like if I'm here, but Keela goes here, but now I go here, but we're still making the same amount of money that we were making in the beginning with no communication as to what we're actually, like, what do you actually want from me? Do you want me to be answering my phone at 10 o'clock at night? Let's have that conversation, right? It doesn't have to be in the job description, but at least let's talk about it. So if I don't answer, then I'm not getting punished the next day, right? I think there's so many like unspoken expectations. And that's in the workplace, that's in life, that's in relationships, right? There's so many unspoken expectations that I feel like it puts people in these positions of failing, right? And so that's a little bit my thoughts around that. I'm like holding so much in because I'm like,
please.
But yes, that's kind of where my head is around it. I'm looking at the chat here and I see there's a question.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Michelle, thanks so much for submitting this question. And it's relevant to Tiffany, what you were just sharing, which is a request to discuss folks who are being promoted or who are being asked to be promoted, who don't exhibit any desire to go above and beyond. So they just do what they ask and no more. I think folks, do we think folks should not be treated poorly for just doing the job they're asked to do, but also shouldn't expect to be promoted doing just that? So I think just a question around this idea of folks getting moved up in an organization when they maybe don't exhibit a desire to change. And Michelle, please feel free to jump in the broader chat if I'm not capturing your question accurately, or if you have any follow-ups for the group once they answer this piece.
I can kick us off. I think this is really tricky, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit later because there's one thing about like the role you're hired for, the expectations that are set when you're hired, right? And there's such a deep conversation around like moving up in an organization and like, what does that mean? And, how many different paths there are to advance. Again, I'm using these air quotes for all of this because it's kind of overwrought. And I definitely can say being a manager, even in my old company, having that mentality of like, we all know that you have to like do the job that you want before you actually get it. And that's BS, right? We'll tie in the title and the theme here. And I perpetuated that for sure in roles that I've been in before. But there's this sort of, we're socialized around this idea that folks have to do these things for free, essentially, in order to then earn the spot and be paid or compensated for the work that they're doing. And I think at Nova, we try to reimagine what that can look like and how career pathing can look. And just because someone is performing the expectation of their job, and we'll talk about this a little bit too, have we made those expectations clear? Tiffany said like, oh, it doesn't have to be in the job description, but maybe it could be, right? Like, let's make it clear. Yeah. Let's, job descriptions are so vague and they have all of the adverbs and, things that we might have different meanings about, but let's put what we expect from folks. And then if folks meet those challenges, why can't we sit down with them and talk about a new set of challenges if they're expressing interest in that? Now, I think, Michelle, knowing sort of from our own context that we have folks coming into the workforce. And in my experience, it's been sort of younger folks who are coming into the workforce, and they have been socialized with the mentality of, I must advance in my career, right? Maybe some of what Keela was talking about before. And so they come in, and on day 2, they're like, when do I become a manager? And then when am I a VP, please? I'll take my VP title now. And that's toxic too, right? But this is like a dynamic that we've created, especially again in like white collar corporate, or probably in nonprofits and higher ed as well. Yeah. So we're in like this symbiotic toxic relationship with folks coming into their first or second jobs thinking, I must advance, and so I'm asking for a promotion immediately, and us wanting them to do more than they need to be doing in order to get that. One last thing I'll say about this, because we talked about this a lot, we talk about it at Nova a lot as well. When folks are talking about a promotion, we're always getting curious about, like, what is it you're looking for? Do you want more challenges? Are you looking for more money, which is valid and fine and great? Let's talk about money. Does the title matter to you? Tiffany and Becca can vouch that I'm a person who hates titles, but they do matter. Tiffany's always like, it matters to some people, and it does. Folks are going to have careers after Nova, and the title will matter to them, and they'll matter to other people. So getting curious about why someone wants a promotion and what it is they're looking for out of it is something that we try to do, because there can be ways to like meet those needs without it having to be this like predefined track. And rant. Tiffany, Keela, thoughts?
Keela?
Sure. I could go on and on about this. I think as an employee, I remember doing the most about having the checklist of being like, okay, I did everything in my job description and I'm ready to be challenged in a new way, and being met with feedback of like, you need to be more of a team player, which was veiled language for letting people into my personal life, or I needed to go to more happy. There was always something bizarre that was not mentioned that needed to be done in order to see me as a leader. And that was incredibly frustrating. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but I also think there's an identity piece, which I think the three of us really spun out on when we were talking internally for this call, about how certain identities, there's almost like a tax that you have to pay to even be seen as a candidate to move forward in a position. And as a Black woman, I felt like that a lot in my career of I could get through all these barriers and then I needed a PhD, or I get through all of these other things and I still didn't know how to connect with X people. Like there's always something that felt absurd and unprepared for me to move up to that next position. From our point now as a consultant, when we have folks asking us about promotions, we do ask, like, what are you looking for? What are you really looking for in this next phase of a career? We also ask our clients to ask hard questions of, do you want the folks in your organization to stay and move up here? A lot of people want to stay in their company and succeed and move up in that place. And I think a lot of organizations limit folks from seeing that growth because they don't have a clear path forward. Folks can see themselves being, I don't want to say loyal, because I think in capitalism, asking for loyalty is like a weird Tron-esque dynamic. But if you want people to stay loyal, you need to see a vision of yourself going up from there. And so that's something that we're constantly going on. I also think it's okay to ask for money or just want a different challenge. But often I think we don't prepare leaders, and leaders aren't prepared to talk about what it's like to develop people underneath them. It's just like, it's a job, do what you need to do and don't bother me about it. Here, you take it.
No, that you all have done an excellent job answering the question, and in my opinion, but I think the last thing you said there, Keela, is really preparing leaders to ask the right questions. And I know it's easier said than done, but like, let's redefine what the norm is, because the norm is right now, to your point, I think it was Michelle that asked the question, like the norm is going above and beyond to be considered for that promotion or that raise. Why is that the norm? Like, who set that norm? And I know like it's a lot easier for us as Nova, right, to like redefine what the norm is at an organization where there's 20 full-time folks and an additional 20 contractors, right? It's a lot easier for us to do that than a company that's like 9,000 people or even 500 people, right? But that's the challenge. And I think, that having that conversation amongst leaders, and not even just amongst leaders, but amongst folks that work at the organization that are just individual contributors, or that frozen middle also, right? Like, what is the norm here? And again, it has taken a while for us to get into this place of of all things toxic when it comes, to things that are happening within the workplace. So it'll take a while for us to unlearn those things and get to a different place. But I think part of it is really understanding what the norm is at your organization. And if it's not sitting well with folks that work there, again, I think it's important to hear from the people, right? Then let's redefine that. Let's talk about how we can shift what that is. Yeah, that's what I got.
I'd like to make a point about, first, there are such thoughtful things in the chat, so I want to thank you all for sharing.
Yes.
A point I'm seeing about two things, about the baseline being overperformance, and that I think Kristen had this response about, you're so lucky to have this experience. And I don't know how many of y'all can relate to working at a team or working at an organization where everybody is overperforming. It's scary. Everyone's working at like 150%. Tensions are always high. Everyone's a competitor. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, what if we all did our jobs and things still got done? And I just want to name that too, of like, overperformance has seeped into culture as a way of, this is how it should be every time you're going to work. And you should be thankful that you have the experience or the opportunity to overwork or give more to the office. And that's not right either.
But okay. Define overperformance, right? Because I feel like this gets messy too. And I'm thinking specifically of someone I used to work with. And when I tell you that this person was in the office at 7 and still there at 7 when I left, that is a fact. And when I also tell you that I could do more work than him in 4 hours than he did in those 12. So like, is it being visible? That's what I feel like it ends up being. Like, it's this, like, I'm showing that I'm doing the most. Like, what is, you know what I mean? When we're giving 150%, which is not physically possible, what does that look like? Like, what does that mean? Is it just energy or is it actual output?
So, see, there's so, but because I think there are ways to show, like, there are ways to show that. So like, for example, if you're working in sales, right? And, you have a person like, let's just say their goal is 1 million a quarter, right? And, and they're, numbers, a lot of times numbers don't lie. But then I also think that in certain cases, like, I could be, if I'm not working in sales, let's just say I'm working as a project lead, right? And I could be working at home, but you have no idea. And let's talk about identities. If I'm a Black gay woman sitting at the office from 7 to 7, and there's a cis white heterosexual man sitting at the office from 7 to 7, are we looked at the same? Are we producing the same amount of work? I mean, so I think there's just so many factors that go into what you're asking, Brand. And I think that's the stuff that's the hard stuff, the gross stuff, the real stuff that we have to talk about. Sorry, Keila, I just jumped in.
No, I'm feeling what you're saying. I agree with you. I think I think it can be by performing the task, and I think it can be like these unspoken things. Like, I think some of it is, I feel like I've worked with people who have truly gone above and beyond, of like, they always had agendas. They always were bringing like snacks. They were like, it was just above and beyond. And then I feel like I've also worked with people who played a game.
Snacks killing me.
Right, like, but it matters. It matters.
New rule at Nova, come with snacks.
Likability. Who played the likability game, who were like BFFs with the manager, and
that's it.
We're like office, whatever. And I feel like those folks sometimes get ahead. I don't want to spin us off, but I also want to say, like, I think sometimes there's some questionable relationship with managers. Like, I don't necessarily think all managers know how to manage. And so if you're like, I'm so loyal to this company, or I just really see you as a mentor, that they see you as more valuable than someone who's sitting at their desk and just answering the emails and getting things done.
Question, is this about me texting you about the Kardashians? Do you feel like I'm crossing the boundary?
I'm performing.
If we want to talk about this here, we can.
We're going to process it out here.
No, I totally agree. I think that like, we're all friends here. We're all family here. We're this, we're that. Because Tiffany's talking about, what if I was at the office 12 hours a day? And in my mind, I immediately think, not only would it not be seen the same as if, whoever this person, let's just call him Ron, as if Ron was at the office for 12 hours a day, I feel like it would actually somehow, there would be a negative narrative about it. Like, is Tiffany
Absolutely.
struggling with her work? Is there a problem? Why is it taking her so long? Why is she here? Is there trouble at home? Like, all of these
Yes.
things I could imagine being in the discourse, especially if you're not buddy with people in the
Yes.
office, right?
Yes.
So it's not just like a neutral, like one person is privileged. It is like a double dynamic where you're being like further marginalized by it.
I couldn't agree more.
Agreed. Becca has a question.
I mean, not me personally, but Dr.
Well,
Hart.
yeah.
All right, so thank you for submitting this. With quiet quitting, what if going above and beyond are different from the supervisor versus the employee? With minoritized populations, values can be misaligned, and therefore the good work that is important to us may not be valued by our supervisors who are part of a majority group identities at work. Any thoughts on that, the misalignment of expectations?
It sounds a lot like relationships and conversations we have with our clients. It's really, I want us to leave feeling inspired, right? But I also want us to have a space too where we can be really honest about the challenges of existing in this world. It is really hard to move a DEI plan forward or have values of DEI when your supervisor doesn't see it. I can very much relate as a working person to being like, it is really important that we elevate the voices of people at this organization. And my supervisor being like, well, that's not really that important, or that doesn't really show up in Q4 in this particular way. And there's some strategic ways to work around that. But ultimately, if the leadership isn't seeing that value, that organization isn't, it's really going to have DEI struggle to be successful within that place. Team, other?
I feel like it kind of tips into, one of the other things we wanted to talk about, which is like, okay, so this is a trend. We're talking about this in the industries, and then like, how do organizations shift to sort of meet this trend or like shift with the trend? And kind of what you're saying, Keela, and what was in the question is all about, to me, the premises underneath some of these things that we just take for granted, right? And like these words, these phrases, these ideas that, again, especially in like white collar jobs, we just throw around willy-nilly and think we all have the same definition. So like, at Nova, we do that activity sometimes where we ask people to get in small groups and they define the word respect. They talk about the word best. They talk about right way. And the goal of that exercise is to like lift out that we don't all have the same definitions of those words, but we see them in these sort of like workplace contracts, like these unspoken things everywhere, right? All the value statements and the job descriptions are full of these like $6 words that presume some shared definition that we've never drilled into. And so why it may feel like pedantic, I feel like some of these buzzwords, we have to like go back to the bones of our organizations and like define these terms. And similarly with like a supervisor, and we'll talk about that because I've really come to like hate almost any word for like a hierarchy at work, but in those, I hate them all. There's not one that makes sense to me. In those structures, if we are not operating, if we haven't been clear about our language and our assumptions of that language, and down to the job description, down to the whatever, and if we're not constantly recalibrating that, then we're just operating in this not only like vague sort of misaligned world, but obviously we're even almost no matter what identities the folks hold, we are allowing dominant narrative to like drive this forward, right? Because we haven't gotten into the weeds and like unpacked and realigned the narrative. So it's going to be dominant narrative, which is going to be white, likely patriarchal cisgender narrative that is pushing our relationships forward. So I don't even know that it's an interpersonal dynamic that can be as well addressed as it is like an organizational dynamic, where we need to like go back to the studs on some of these foundational pieces and like really drill into like our expectations, really define things, have shared definitions, talk about what things look like in practice, and what does it look like when we're doing this well? What does it not look like when we're doing it not well? So that we're all painting a picture together. I think the vague, buzzwordy language, a la quiet quitting, is such an Achilles heel of like our working worlds these days.
Bryn, what do you think about, because I'm just on the if I'm like sitting and I'm in, you know, listening to us talk, and I'm hearing what you just said, right? I'm like as an employee, like, am I going to my manager and saying, I think we should do this? Like, I think that we should.
At your own peril.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I feel like, because I agree with you, and it really has to be driven from like some type of leadership, because, well, it doesn't have to be, but I feel like if it's put on, you know, the plate of someone who, you know, is not in leadership or not in that managerial position, it could be tough, right? For many reasons. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way, but it often is. What if, but like, let's just like think, ideate together. Like, if I'm that person and I'm not in a managerial position, or I'm not a leader, like, is there a way for me to insert the idea of what you're saying to leadership? You know, because that's why I feel for those folks.
Yeah. I feel like you're naming exactly. Like, I think it is super fraught to be the employee bringing that conversation. I wonder if there's a way to maybe ask for those examples. Like, I feel like, you know, to say, hey, can you share when this is the piece that we've agreed on together. I understand this to be core to my role, or like something I would need to do to like be promoted. Can you give me examples of like how that would look to you? How would you know if I was doing this well? What would it look like if I was doing this not well? But I think it's really threading a needle, because if there's any, you know, that dynamic, especially with identities in mind, the next thing you know could be Tiffany's not a team player. And like, you know, the passive aggression of white women knows no boundaries. So like that could easily blow back on someone.
Yeah, Tiffany's not being nice.
Right. Tiffany's angry.
She's unapproachable.
Right. Right. So I do think it's fraught. I think ideally organizations, HR teams, leadership teams are pushing this as a way to meet the moment, as opposed to, I think the last thing we would want is to land on the shoulders of marginalized employees within the organization. Yeah.
And I also think like folks with marginalized identities are often the people to see the inequality within the organization before someone else too. On a same tactic or another tactic for uplifting something, I would think about coalition building, like who are people you can partner with to bring this up. So I've worked with other colleagues and been like, did you find that a little spiky? Like, what if we brought it up together? Like, that's a way. Or like, everything is political. Like, everything is political. So who is someone in your office who is an activator, who gets things done? Who is someone in your office who is well received? Could you plant a seed for them to help elevate, or work together with them to get things elevated? I think sometimes you think like, okay, we have this great idea and it's just going to get accepted, but there's truly a lot of like strategy that can go behind getting something done within your office, or having a more inclusive environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It mirrors community organizing in such a like depressing and also inspiring way. Right.
Yeah.
So many of the same things.
And we need each other. Like, I think that's so hard because capitalism gives us the narrative that we don't.
There's 10 people waiting for your job. Yeah.
Whatever Lady Gaga said, somebody in the room believes in you if there are 10,000 that don't. Yeah, you need that one person. We really do need each other to move all of this work forward.
Well, I wish we didn't have 40 minutes left, because we would just end it on that note, but we are going to keep going.
I know, I'm like, oh, my heart.
Such a mic drop.
Let's hug everyone.
We're gonna keep going. Okay, so I'm gonna keep ranting about the words that I don't like, right? Because we started talking about that. So one of them is engagement, which is one that I feel like anyone on this call, like, we need to define engagement. We talk about employee engagement, and that's been, when we talk about quiet quitting, one of the things that's pointed to is like, I feel like in the early 2000s, it was all about like employee engagement surveys, and are your employees engaged, and how engaged, and this many employees are not engaged. And like, I'm screaming into the abyss of like, what does it mean to be engaged? How are you defining it? And we've seen some measures where they're like trying to define it. But most often you're like self-reporting, asking employees if they're engaged, and they're like, I don't know, maybe. And it's also curious, again, this, much like the quiet quitting conversation, employee engagement puts all this onus on the employee to be engaged rather than what efforts is the organization putting forth to engage you. And again, like, what does that mean? It's also a word for like about to be married to your loyalty conversation. So like, it's kind of weird of like, what does it mean to be engaged? Like, do I care about what happens here? Do I want us to succeed? Do I understand the mission of the organization? Is it, I think that can start to get really weird too, when we start to ask people to like love it, to really be invested, depending on the organization. I think that's kind of a weird ask. So I feel like engagement is this old buzzword that really needs to be like redefined. And then, as Tiffany and I were just saying, I hate the word boss. I hate the word supervisor. I hate the word superior. Like, can we never say that in a work context? Like, superior to whom? So I feel like all of these words really, even though it feels like semantics, or like, who cares if we change our language? I think shifting language and like getting into some of this has a real cultural impact in these organizations, because we talk about these things as if they're like real. People are paid based on some of these terms. So I feel like we need to unpack them and stop using the word boss, please. Which Keela doesn't mind. Keela's fine with boss.
Yeah. I don't think it's that weird. I also feel like with some clients, we have this like tension of it clearly as a hierarchy. And they're like, we need to be able to distinguish who is where, and I'm not saying superior is an appropriate word. It feels very like feudalism.
Where?
Yeah. We need new language, I guess. We need new language.
I feel like people just have different responsibilities within an organization.
They do.
That doesn't need to be labeled so directly. Like, my responsibility is making sure that Keela does shit right. That's weird. See, I told you I was going to curse. I'm sorry, y'all.
We did our best.
We did it. But like, that's a weird job to have.
I agree with you.
That's my role
and
here.
People have that. That's a job.
People have that job. That's a lot of jobs.
Make sure Keela doesn't mess up.
So I don't disagree. I think that the relationship, okay, maybe that's a weird word. The dynamic between someone who's looked at as a manager and someone who's looked at as the person that the manager is managing.
Managee.
I think though that like there is something to be said, Brent, kind of to your point, like in this example, it's my job to make sure that he's doing shit right? But if you're doing some of the same work that Keela is doing, I think that is just naturally brings on a different level of respect, right? Like, so if I'm a managee of someone, and I'm a project lead, and I'm not saying in all cases that if you're managing a project lead that you also need to be doing project lead things. I kind of am. Like, you can like there's because also things shift and change. So I'm not saying that if I'm a project lead and I'm being managed by someone, dip your toes in the water at some point. Don't just bark at me the whole time and tell me what I'm doing wrong, but you don't understand what's happening, and you haven't done any of this work in a year or two. So I think that if there has to be this dynamic, if people are like, there has to be hierarchy, then like, get your hands dirty, do some of the work also, instead of just pointing fingers and barking orders all the time. Like, I think that, at least in my time of managing, the relationship and the changes between the two people. Like at a previous organization where I was working at, we would be out in the field a lot, doing, setting up events and things like that, right? And yes, I'm telling people, hey, today you do this, you do that, but also I'm doing it with them, or I'm doing something else. I'm contributing. I'm not just pointing my finger and telling everybody what to do. Even if that was done to me before, that doesn't work. It doesn't work.
No, well, I feel like there is validity in someone's responsibility is to have the big picture in mind. Somebody's responsibility is these things that are not your individual contributor responsibility. And my responsibility might be to coach you, to guide you, because I've been doing, to your point, I've been a practitioner in whatever this role is. And also I have the big picture in mind. That is different than being someone's boss, right? And that's where I think it gets twisted of like, am I here to coach? Am I here to guide? Am I here to lead towards a vision that maybe not everyone like has access to? None of those to me are supervisor, superior, or boss language, right? Or even manager. Like I think manager is a lot like boss.
Really?
It's weird. Who are you managing? Managing what? Manage yourself.
A team? I just feel like
a team.
I love your vibe. They're coach. Okay. But I feel like what we're seeing with a lot of our clients is I'm going to just use the word for the sake of the example. There's a supervisor, there's somebody underneath them, and they can't do the person underneath them's job. And they don't care to do it. I feel like there's this culture going back to maybe some of the quiet quitting and some of the workplace trends that we're seeing about becoming a middle manager in this like scarcity mindset of like, you got to get to a manager, you got to get to a level where you have an assistant, and then you get to check out. And then we see this when we go into organizations of these folks up top have no idea what the people below them do. And they don't want to get their hands into it. And so it just heightens this division. And it also comes with a class difference, like you're saying, Bren, of like having a manager or a supervisor or VP title comes with a pay raise. And so it's just this greater division between people who work and have, lack of a better word, boots on the ground, and folks who have the assistance and don't know how to do that work.
And I feel like that is why a lot of companies can't keep good folks, because because why would I want to work, Brand, you're gonna hate this. Why would I want to work under somebody like that? Like, that's why, good people leave places and go elsewhere. Because the folks up, the division just keeps going like this, and this. And so,
Who was it during the pandemic, Keela? I feel like you'll know this. Wasn't there a story of like, or someone in the chat of a CEO, like during the pandemic, and there was this labor shortage, and like the CEO was out like delivering whatever their product was. It was like a pizza place or something.
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna remember what it was.
There was something where DoorDash had its headquarters people do a delivery, and there was an uprising. Yes. Because they were like, what?
Why are we doing this?
Do what?
Right. That's what it was.
So who was mad? Who was mad about it? The people that were
the headquarters people who now had to go DoorDash were like, why am I DoorDash?
They were required. The salaried employees were required to go do the work of the gig workers as part of their roles, and they were pissed.
And there's so much to unpack here of like, that was not my job description. It's also like the hierarchy of like how we treat gig workers, like absolute trash. Like, and like I said at the beginning of the call, like this is we're focusing on this like white collar type of work. And that's not dismissive of blue collar work and how much blue collar folks have to sweat in this country to get any type of equity in existence. But like, there is so clearly a hierarchy, which is also why I think people are obsessed with titles.
I'm sorry, but like, okay, you have to go DoorDash, employees, you have to go deliver stuff, right? Like, and it's not in your job description. Welcome to the world of most people, again, where they have to do work that is not in their job description. Cry me a river. I don't care. Like, this is like the average person is doing more than they are, that has been told that is required of them, like that. So when people are like, oh my gosh, like, especially like VP, like, I don't care. Like it's not.
But Tiff, what if you worked there as a Black gay woman, you're working at DoorDash, you have your job, your middle, whatever. And then they're like, you have to go deliver Burger King. You would be like, you might have the wrong one. Friends.
No, what I would, so my initial reaction probably would be like, y'all, wow. But my next my next reaction would probably be, let's talk about this though. Like, why are we doing this? Like,
That's
let's
a reasonable response.
like, yeah, like, let's talk about this and help me understand why we're at this point. Because if we're talking, but again, that's the communication piece, right? Instead of you just barking orders, because it's probably someone above me who's telling me to do this. Okay, let's have a conversation about that. Now, I'm the type of person where I wouldn't have a problem being like, let's talk about that, right? Some people maybe wouldn't be comfortable with that, and that sucks. And I feel like, you know, but maybe to Keela's point earlier, like, confide in someone who you trust enough to be like, hey, do you feel comfortable with me going to leadership or going to our boss or whoever, and getting a little bit more information as to why they're asking us to do this. So that's I think that's how I would respond. That's me saying that's how I respond in the moment of not being in that actual position, right? Like, just to be honest, but I do think that that's how I would respond. Me 5 years ago, probably not. Me now, yeah.
I would feel a type of way. Like, this was not what we agreed to. I don't have a car. Like, am I going to be on my bike? Like, what's going on? And then if this is how we got, like, if this is, I don't want to spin us into another place, but if our company is in a place where I now need to be a delivery person, when you hired me to do analytics, I'm scared. Like, are we okay? Because that's so far out of my skill set. You have me going places you don't want.
Tiffany and I do need to talk to you about Nova's next venture.
Stop. You have to let me go.
You need to get a car. You
I
get a
have to
car
get a
very
car.
quickly.
I think that's fair though. Like, I think, and that's, you know, I think that's you know, not that you need my validation here, but I think that's
I appreciate hearing you too.
a completely fair response. And they might say, we in a place and we need you, we really need you to do this. And that's where, this is going to go in I'm about to take this conversation to another place. Let's stay here for now.
Okay. I'm with you.
And because some people may say, oh, well, that's not what I was hired to do. You know, I might have to, some people have the privilege,
the means to do it. I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. To
be like, well, then I guess I got to go find something else, and some don't. So but I think that I really, really do think that open communication changes a lot of things.
I agree with that.
And it doesn't have to be them saying, no, we're in a great place, we just want you to be a delivery person, because we all know that that's probably not the truth.
I think it was a PR stunt, just to be clear. Like, DoorDash is fine.
And that makes it,
that makes it way worse.
Way worse. That's absolutely chaotic. And to the money piece, I want to say, like, as a millennial and where I am in age of, I have money trauma. So me 5 years ago, I'd be like, well, I got to rent a car. I got to get to Enterprise tonight and take this little sedan. And while I'm trying to heal some of that, and I feel confident saying, like, no, I don't want to do that, I would still be concerned of, like, how my livelihood is in danger. And I just think, like, again, working class and how we exist are so tied together in this country. It's hard to pull that apart.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at time, not to deter us, but I know we wanted to open it up for some dialogue with our guests.
Yeah, we do. We want folks to jump into this. We have some prompts too, but it's sort of to get us into it. I feel like I would love to look forward a little bit. We're kind of in this, you know, we're talking about like what's happening now, and then like, so where is it going? And I think having folks jump in to where it's going for them, or where they see this going. And again, talking about these terms and these ideas, I feel like we've come out of this age. The last 10 years in our space has been like this age of feedback, right? Of like, everyone's doing feedback workshops, and like we give each other feedback, and your manager gives you feedback, and we're out of this annual performance review cycle, and we're into this always on feedback, and everyone's doing radical candor, which has like its own set of challenges and things about it. And I feel like we're tipping in with this quiet quitting. We're tipping into this like era of like, I'm good, no notes, thank you very much, not available for your notes, right? Basically, to what we're saying, where employees are going to be, when we look at what's happening across more blue collar, or like retail environments, frontline employee environments of unionizing, right? I know that's a huge, scary word for a lot of organizations, but they're unionizing because they want this clarity, right? And they want it to not be subjective that I could lose my job, or not be subjective that I could be not promoted. So I do feel like even salaried non-union employees are going to start looking for that as well, and be less open to like feedback. We are in this hybrid / remote world. Some of those relationships that Keela mentioned, I feel like are not as accessible to people. So now we're like out of this maybe friend zone in some work relationships, and again getting into this like, who are you to give me notes? Like what's the note about? I'll say one thing that Nova, that we keep talking about ourselves internally and talking with clients about is, if you look at how folks are judged or reviewed at your organization, is it about how they do their job or about the outcomes of their job? And if it's about the outcomes, are they still, when we talk about promoting them, or we talk about feedback for Tiffany or whoever, are we still talking about how she got there versus the outcomes? And we've definitely seen that very few organizations have put in the real work to define the outcomes they want to see, so they can release the how do we get there. Like I said, Ron might be here for 12 hours, I might be here for 5, but if our output is what we've defined, then like we're both good. And that's hard because in Innova, we've tried to like codify some of those intangibles too, because it's not just like, not every industry is, I filed my 10 reports for the day, that was my quota. No, it doesn't have to be like quota based for outcome. We've talked about, how do we want our clients to feel when we work with them? How do we want each other to feel when we work with each other? And we've come up with sort of we're working on shared agreements for that, right? Understandings of that. We want our clients to feel like they're well communicated with, they're in the know. So that does set some expectations that the folks on our team are communicating with clients regularly. Now, we're not saying you need to respond to an email within 10 hours because that's dictating how, but as long as we're consistently seeing that from clients, that they feel like they have the information they need when they need it, then we're hitting what we wanted to do. It's hard and sort of detailed and very like semantically draining work, but it helps us let go of the how. And when you let go of the how people get to things, then you don't need so many bosses, right? And like managers and supervisors who are managing process versus outcomes. And I hope that's where we're going with this trend, is that we start to look more at outcomes, less at managing process. But that requires organizations to like really roll up their sleeves and do some like deep and time consuming work on their end. And I don't know if folks are going to be here for it. Tiffany, Keela, what do you all see?
I mean, I think it's worth it, right? Like, and I'm glad that you altered your language a bit and said, we're working on, not we're there yet, right? Like, this is something that we're working on at Nova. And I think in the long run, it's worth it. I think people are happier. They don't feel like they're being micromanaged. There's a vision there. Like, we all like the outcomes are part of the vision, right? And I definitely want Keela to jump in, because I'm saying this from my perspective. But I do think I think in the long run, it is worth it. What do you want this person to get done? And does it mean you have to change some of the way, like the processes and the way that you onboard people and the way that you write your job descriptions? Yes, and probably more, right? But I think in the long run, I'm saying return, but I don't mean that I don't just mean that financially, right? I mean in other ways as well. I think it's worth it. Keela, what do you think?
Okay, I'll do a soft and then like a firm thing. A soft thing is what I like about the Nova team. And I say this to folks, is it's not perfect, but we're really open to the dialogue of making it better. And we all believe in this vision. And that's really special. That's something that can't happen everywhere. And I think of other teams where I've worked on, in which I've told my manager, this feels exclusive, or this feels like harassment for other people. And I know that's two different journeys. And they didn't hear that well. And I felt like I was being punished for speaking up. And so I just want to name that there's something special when you can get to a place and you're working with a team of people who want to be better and want to make things better. And the work that goes into that is really really special. On the firm side of that, of what we're seeing with clients is, I think post 2020, we're in a place, I think 2020 woke some people up, in which they realized they could be better and hadn't been the best they could be. And now that we get a little bit further away from that before we head into the election, this political zeitgeist is a little bit quieter, and folks aren't necessarily seeing DEI as a imperative right now. And so I feel like the tension to make workplaces better, to see each other as people, to care for each other, feels like the counter narrative right now. And when we head back into an election, people will start to care and be like, oh, we're so different and blah, blah, blah. And so I think we're always working with that tension, the attention deficit of what people find important. And then we're just working with the fact that like the system is not built for equity. And so we're always working against that resistance to make things better. And so I just wanted to name that.
Nope, that's totally true. And I feel like when you're talking, Keela, about like the horizon, my truest wish is, and like, look, it could go this way, right? Because we have this thing where employees are sort of reclaiming power in the relationship and the dynamic, which is because they have more power now, because there were so many more job openings than, white collar bodies to fill them.
Yeah.
But where we would hope that folks look at this pivot point and like open up and reimagine and use it as a wedge towards something different. What tends to happen is we double down on the old way, right?
Yeah.
We hire 20 more managers to stop the quiet quitting, and we get rid of all these folks and replace them so that they do like have that trauma of, I am replaceable. Everyone's replaceable in the system. And that's tended to be how things have gone when we've been met with some of these like choice point moments. I hope that some of the other dynamics that you mentioned, like push us more towards that, like opening up. I would certainly encourage folks on this webinar, anyone watching this in your organization, to use it as a wedge and not as this opportunity to double down and like clap back on employees. But that's easier said than done. It is much easier to just hire 10 more middle managers and pursue the status quo aggressively than it is to go back to the studs and reimagine how this relationship is going to look. I promise you, my friends, your organization will be so much healthier and happier and ahead of the curve if you do the latter, right? If you do the hard work, it will be so much better.
Is it though? And I'd say, because I mean, we know like hiring people costs money. Hiring people is time, right?
Oh, true. Yeah.
And so I do think like there is something to be said. Like if you see, first of all, I was about to say, if you see someone quiet quitting, right? Like, which again, it's not quiet. Like if you like, it's like, let's have a conversation, let's just use, I don't even want to say a name. Let's have a conversation, Bill, right? About
Bill.
about this, right? And because I think that I don't think that it's necessarily easier to hire 10 people.
You're right.
I think that is a lot of time, and that's a lot of resources.
It's such a narrative too, Tiffany. Thank you for naming that, because it's true about DEI too, right? We always tell people like, you think this is harder, but it's not. What you're doing is actually the hardest thing. Like you are willing to do a harder thing because you don't want to change, but you're totally right.
Yeah.
It's not easier and it's not cheaper.
Yeah.
It's not anything.
I agree. A lot of our calls, we'll close the Zoom and I just sit and kind of think about, there's so many systems at play that we're working to pull apart. And at the end of the day, if you don't want to do it, it's not going to get done. And I think there are many organizations who will agree to a certain level and then not want to make any change after that. And it's hard. It's just hard work. Okay. I'd love to see your takeaways, Bren.
Okay. I mean, there are takeaways, Keela. They're not just mine.
A shared takeaway.
Oh, look, now we're all the way back here. Okay. Okay. So, what's the point? How should your org deal with quiet quitting? And I think these are just recapping some of the things we've already blathered on about. So, it's important how we frame this if we are talking about it as a phenomena at work, that it is not an employee issue. This is an organizational issue, right? This is not about Gen Z doing Gen Z things. This is an organizational issue, and we should always come at it from that lens. As we said, use this as a wedge, right? This is not a negative. This is an opportunity to get ahead of the curve of this trend and where it's going, and to be in front of it instead of reactive to it. Has your organization defined outcomes? Has your organization defined values? And not just the inclusivity is our value. Really get granular, right? What does it look like? To what we were saying before, Nova, and again, we have the benefit of being a smaller team, but these things can scale, right? We often think of our organization as one of the best things that we can do is model some of these ways of being, and then watch our clients scale them for themselves. And that's some of the most gratifying work that we get to be a part of. Get into the messiness of the conversation and allow folks to be part of these conversations. Don't have a leadership team define the values and then e-blast them out to folks and say, this is your values now. Or consider if you've over-defined process and you have a bunch of managers in place to enforce the process, because that is going to continue, I believe, to build tension in your dynamic as we see this sort of new generation of workers come in. I think that dynamic will continue to not serve organizations ultimately. And then you're engaging your workforce, right? How do we define engage? What does that mean? And really, how do they want to be engaged? That should be how we're defining engagement. And that means it should change every few years, however often, right? That it is a dynamic and fluid thing. None of us thought that we would be engaging in this sort of world a couple of years ago, socially, right? With the physical, technologically, none of this. So it should be a dynamic and fluid and sort of moving conversation about how the workforce wants to be engaged and how you're able to meet them there as an organization.
Bryn, I want to double down on one of your points. You said if there are folks in here that are listening to us who are managers or who are I'm just using gross words right now because we don't have a lot of time, overseeing a team, right? Or you have a team of people that you're working with, it can start with you. It doesn't have to be this thing where as a person who's leading a team, you feel like you have to go to the person that's managing you to have these ideas and say, hey, this is what I want to do with my team. Just do it, right? If you want to start engaging with your team more to understand, have a conversation with your team about quiet quitting. That is, I think that's a thing where, talk to your team, engage them, understand how they feel about it. I mean, and it can even go as far as you being do you feel like you're at a point where you are just doing the job that you've been hired to do and you don't want to go and be above and beyond, and have a conversation about that. Be the model. Be the model team for the rest of the folks that work there, because in very, very large organizations, it probably is going to be hard to take to take what we're saying and, take to the higher ups and so, but be that team that it starts with. And that's how I look at it sometimes. When I was working at another organization, I was running a team with another woman, and not to say we disconnected from the rest of the organization, but our team was successful because we did things on our own and we modeled for other folks.
All right. People are going to lose folks for meetings. You all are the best. We are recording this. We're going to send it around. You'll be able to relive this whole conversation as many times as you want. If you're a Keela fan, this is where you get your Keela content. And then our next webinar, I think we're looking to do these on the final Fridays of the month. So our next conversation, you should be getting a link and an invite to that. We'd love to have you all join us for that one as well. There'll be different folks as part of it. And then Keela, what does Lady Gaga say?
If there's one person in a room who believes in you out of a million, something, that's all that matters.
Thanks, y'all, for being here.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah.